The city had its own rhythm, a relentless hum of activity that never paused. Not for dawn, nor dusk, nor the creatures that lurked in its shadows. For Luna, this rhythm was a backdrop to her solitary existence. She padded softly along the cracked pavement of the alley, her movements deliberate and quiet. Her emerald eyes scanned her surroundings, ever alert for danger. The city was not kind to strays, and Luna had learned to navigate its unkindness with precision. Her coat, once sleek and shiny, now bore the evidence of years spent dodging threats and braving the elements. Patches of fur were thin, revealing scars that told stories of close calls and narrow escapes. Her tail twitched as she listened for the familiar sounds of opportunity, the clang of a trash can lid or the fading chatter of a restaurant's late-night staff. These were the moments she lived for, scraps discarded without thought but vital to her survival. Luna's world was small, confined to alleys, dumpsters, and the occasional patch of sunlight that filtered through the towering buildings. The humans who lived here rarely noticed her, and when they did, it was with disdain or indifference. A kick here, a shouted shoo there, it was all the same to her. She'd long stopped expecting kindness from them. The city had taught her that survival depended on herself and her ability to stay invisible. But even in this bleak existence, there were moments of beauty. Luna often found herself perched on a high ledge at dawn, watching as the sun painted the city in shades of gold and orange. For a few fleeting minutes, the grime and decay seemed to fade, replaced by something almost magical. It was in these moments that Luna felt a faint stir of something she couldn't name, a whisper of hope or a memory of a time when her life had been different. Her days were a constant balance between hunger and safety. Hunger always pushed her out of her hiding spots, forcing her to venture into the open where danger lurked. Safety, however, kept her movements cautious and her senses sharp. She knew which alleys offered refuge and which were traps, learned through trial and error and the occasional painful lesson. The scars on her body were proof of her mistakes, each one a reminder of the high cost of a misstep. Tonight was no different. The chill in the air hinted at the coming winter, and Luna's thin frame shivered as she crept along a row of overflowing trash bins. Her stomach growled, but she ignored it, her focus on the faint scent of leftover food. The noise of the city seemed distant here, muffled by the high walls of the alley. Luna's ears twitched at every sound, her sharp gaze darting between shadows. She moved with a grace that spoke of years of experience, each step purposeful and silent. As she scavenged, Luna's mind wandered to a time when she hadn't been alone. She could barely recall the faces of her littermates or the warmth of her mother's body, but the memory was there, buried beneath layers of survival instinct. It had been a fleeting chapter in her life, lost to the chaos of the streets. Now, her days blurred together, each one a mirror of the last, with nothing to distinguish them but the changing seasons. The alley felt particularly lifeless tonight, the usual scraps harder to come by. Luna's frustration grew as she sifted through the bins, her nose twitching at the faint scent of something edible. A sudden noise startled her, a loud clang, followed by a flash of movement. Luna froze, her muscles tensing as she scanned the darkness. After a moment, she relaxed. It was just the wind knocking over a loose can. Still, the interruption reminded her to stay vigilant. Eventually, Luna gave up on this stretch of alley and moved on, her paws silent against the pavement. She rounded a corner, her senses tuned to the faintest sound or smell. That's when she heard it, a noise that didn't belong to the usual city symphony. It was faint, almost drowned out by the hum of traffic in the distance. Luna paused, her ears swiveling as she tried to pinpoint the source. It was a sound she hadn't heard in years, one that tugged at something deep within her. A high-pitched whimper, soft and intermittent. It wasn't the cry of an injured bird or the squeak of a rat. It was something else, something helpless. Luna's heart, hardened by years of solitude, gave an unfamiliar flutter. Her instincts screamed at her to turn away, to ignore it, and focus on her survival. But her paws moved forward, drawn by a force she couldn't explain. The sound grew louder as she approached a rusted dumpster, its lid slightly ajar. Luna hesitated, her nose twitching as she caught a faint, unfamiliar scent. She leaped onto the edge of the dumpster, her green eyes peering into the darkness below. What she saw made her breath catch. For tiny forms huddled together, their small bodies trembling with cold. Their eyes were barely open, their fur matted and dirty. They were pups, abandoned and helpless. Luna blinked, her mind racing. She wasn't their kind. She wasn't their mother. But in that moment, none of it mattered. The sight of the puppies in the dumpster held Luna motionless for a moment. Their frail bodies pressed together in a desperate attempt to share warmth, and their shallow breaths came out in faint puffs that dissipated into the cold air. Each whimper they made was a plea, not just for food or warmth, but for the comfort they had been cruelly denied. Luna's sharp instincts told her to turn away. These creatures were not her problem. Yet something kept her there, her claws gripping the edge of the dumpster as she stared. The smallest of the puppies let out a weak, high-pitched cry, shifting closer to its siblings. Its tiny paw reached out blindly, brushing against Luna's own. A shiver ran through her, not from the cold, but from something deeper. She leaped lightly into the dumpster, the sound of her landing causing the puppies to stir. They flinched at first, but their exhaustion soon overpowered their fear. They weren't even strong enough to properly react to her presence. Luna sniffed cautiously, circling the huddled group. Their scent was foreign to her, earthy and faintly sweet, mixed with the acrid smell of the garbage that surrounded them. They had clearly been here for hours, if not longer. She noted their thin frames, the way their rib cages pressed visibly against their skin, and the matted fur that barely shielded them from the biting cold. Their condition triggered something buried deep within her, a maternal instinct she thought she'd long forgotten. She nudged one of them with her nose. The little pup gave a feeble wiggle, its eyes barely open as it emitted another whimper. Luna stepped back, unsure of what to do. This wasn't her fight. She had her own survival to worry about, her own food to find, her own warmth to seek. Yet as she turned toward the edge of the dumpster, intending to leave, a soft sound stopped her. It wasn't just a cry, it was a plea. The smallest pup, the one she had nudged, was attempting to follow her. It barely managed to lift its head, its tiny legs trembling as it tried to crawl toward her. Luna froze, her green eyes wide. The pup collapsed back into the pile of its siblings, too weak to continue. That was the moment something shifted in Luna. She couldn't name it, couldn't even fully understand it, but she knew she couldn't walk away. With a determined flick of her tail, Luna settled down beside the puppies. The smell of rotting food and metallic garbage filled her nose, but she ignored it. Carefully, she curled her body around the trembling pups, feeling their tiny frames press against her side. She wasn't much warmer than they were, but it was all she had to offer. Her rough tongue rasped gently over the smallest pup, an instinctive gesture meant to soothe and clean. The puppies quieted slightly, their whimpers fading as they sank into her warmth. Luna's sharp ears caught the sound of their uneven breathing, each exhale a fragile thread connecting them to life. She stayed awake long into the night, her body coiled protectively around them. Every so often, one would stir or whine, and she would nuzzle them closer, reassuring them with her presence. Morning light seeped into the alley, pale and cold. Luna's eyes blinked open, her body stiff from the uncomfortable position she'd held all night. The puppies were still pressed against her, their tiny forms radiating a fragile warmth. Luna carefully rose, her movements slow so as not to disturb them. Hunger gnawed at her stomach, a sharp reminder of her own needs. Yet as she looked at the puppies, now quiet and resting, she knew she couldn't simply leave. Leaping out of the dumpster, Luna landed softly on the cracked pavement below. She paused to scan her surroundings before slipping into the shadows, her lean frame blending seamlessly with the alley's grime. The hunt for food took on a new urgency now. She wasn't just feeding herself. Every scrap she found was a lifeline for the tiny creatures she had taken under her care. Her search led her to a discarded bag near the back of a fast food restaurant. It was slim pickings, but she managed to drag a few cold, grease-stained fries from the bag. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. Clutching the fries gently in her jaws, she hurried back to the dumpster. The sight of the puppies waiting, their small bodies still curled together in the nest of trash, filled her with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. Luna hopped back inside and placed the fries in front of them. The puppies were too young to eat on their own, their attempts to nibble at the food clumsy and ineffective. Luna sighed, if she could sigh, and lay back down, letting them press against her once more. Their small hearts beat against her side, a rhythmic reminder of the fragile lives she had now claimed as her responsibility. As the day wore on, Luna stayed with the puppies, her watchful eyes scanning the alley for any sign of danger. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, or how she would manage to keep them alive. All she knew was that she had made a choice, and she would see it through. For the first time in a long while, Luna wasn't surviving just for herself. The days that followed were a blur of exhaustion and resolve. Luna's world had narrowed to a singular focus, keeping the tiny lives she had taken in safe and alive. Every task that had once been simple, scavenging for scraps, avoiding predators, and finding shelter, now carried new layers of difficulty. Her movements, once fluid and swift, were slower now as she balanced her own survival with the overwhelming needs of the puppies. Each morning began the same way. Luna would rise carefully, her stiff, malnourished body aching from the night spent curled around the puppies. They would mewl weakly, their voices rising in unison as if reminding her of their hunger. Her sharp ears picked up their faint heartbeats, a fragile rhythm that spurred her into action. Hunger gnawed at her insides, but she pushed the feeling aside, knowing her needs would have to wait. The city was an unforgiving place for a cat, but for a makeshift family of one feline and 4 vulnerable pups, it was a battlefield. Luna slipped out of their hiding place at dawn, her sleek body moving through the shadows with practiced precision. The puppies were tucked safely in the old dumpster, wrapped in the tattered blanket she had found. It wasn't much, but it shielded them from the worst of the biting wind. Luna's nose twitched as she followed the faint scent of food. Behind a busy cafe, she found a trash bin overflowing with discarded pastries and scraps of bread. A treasure trove, but as she approached, her path was blocked by a large stray dog. Its growl rumbled through the narrow alley, low and menacing. Luna froze, her muscles taut. Her instincts screamed at her to run, but the image of the puppies waiting, hungry and helpless, kept her rooted in place. The dog lunged, and Luna darted to the side, her claws scraping against the concrete as she scrambled for safety. She watched from a safe distance as the dog devoured the food, her body trembling with frustration. When the dog finally left, she crept back, searching the bin for anything it had overlooked. She found a half-eaten muffin and a piece of cheese, clutching them in her jaws as she raced back to the puppies. Her return was met with a chorus of eager whimpers. The puppies struggled to their feet, wobbling as they sniffed at the food she had brought. Luna watched as they attempted to eat, their tiny teeth gnawing at the muffin's edge. She nudged the food closer to them, her green eyes soft with a patience she hadn't known she possessed. It wasn't enough to fill their bellies, but it would have to do. As the days stretched on, Luna's body grew thinner. Her ribs jutted sharply against her fur, and her once powerful leaps became clumsy and weak. Yet she refused to let herself rest. Each night, she returned to the dumpster with whatever scraps she could find. She lay down beside the puppies, licking their fur to clean them and whispering silent promises to protect them. Their warmth against her side was the only comfort she allowed herself. One night, the weather turned. Rain poured from the sky, cold and relentless. The dumpster offered little shelter, the metal walls amplifying the sound of the storm. Water seeped through the cracks, soaking the blanket and pooling around their fragile nest. The puppies cried, their tiny bodies shivering uncontrollably. Luna pressed herself against them, her fur drenched and clinging to her frame. She wished she could do more, but all she had to offer was her warmth and presence. When the rain finally stopped, Luna ventured out, her body trembling with fatigue. She found a broken crate behind a nearby warehouse and dragged it, inch by painful inch, back to the dumpster. It took her hours, her claws scraping against the rough wood as she worked. But when she was done, she had built a makeshift shelter for the puppies, a small haven within the cold, unyielding city. Her days became a cycle of scavenging, protecting, and nurturing. She grew more protective as the puppies became stronger, their tiny legs steadying as they began to explore their surroundings. She hissed at passing birds and prowling rats, her once dormant maternal instincts sharpening into ferocity. The puppies began to see her as their mother, following her movements and seeking her warmth at every opportunity. Luna's world was no longer her own. Her body bore the weight of her sacrifice, but her spirit burned brighter than ever. She had found a purpose, a reason to endure the hardships of the city. Each wag of a tiny tail and each sleepy nuzzle against her side reminded her that, against all odds, she was keeping them alive. And that was enough to keep her going. Clara wandered the streets, her shoulders hunched against the late afternoon chill. The city had always felt indifferent to her, a backdrop of concrete and noise that offered little solace. Since her mother's death, it had grown colder still, its once familiar streets now filled with memories that stung. She walked to escape the oppressive silence of her home, her hands stuffed into the pockets of her oversized coat, her steps aimless. As she turned down an alley she rarely visited, a flicker of movement caught her eye. She paused, squinting into the dim light. A cat. At first, it seemed unremarkable, a stray like so many others she'd seen. But then Clara noticed something unusual. Nestled against the cat were tiny, wriggling forms. She moved closer, her curiosity piqued, though she took care not to startle the animal. The scene stopped her in her tracks. For puppies, no bigger than her hand, were pressed against the cat's side, their small bodies rising and falling with uneven breaths. The cat's coat was thin, its ribs visible beneath the patches of matted fur. Yet, despite its own obvious struggle, it lay curled protectively around the puppies, its green eyes fixed on Clara with a wary intensity. "What?" Clara whispered, her breath catching. She crouched slowly, her heart aching at the sight. The puppies looked so fragile, their tiny paws twitching as they slept. The cat's gaze never left hers, a mixture of defiance and exhaustion. Clara felt a lump form in her throat. She had seen plenty of strays before, but this was something else. It was as if the cat had taken on a burden far greater than itself, an act of love that defied reason. Clara reached into her pocket and pulled out the remains of the sandwich she had brought with her. Tearing off a piece of bread, she placed it on the ground and backed away, giving the cat space. The cat didn't move at first, its body coiled like a spring, ready to defend its makeshift family. Clara waited, her knees pressed against the cold concrete, her breath visible in the air. After what felt like an eternity, the cat slowly rose. Its movements were deliberate, cautious. It sniffed at the bread before snatching it up and retreating to its nest. Clara watched as it placed the food in front of the puppies, nudging them gently with its nose. The smallest pup let out a soft whimper, its tiny tongue lapping at the bread clumsily. The sight made Clara's heart ache even more. "You're incredible," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the distant hum of the city. The cat didn't respond, of course, but something in its eyes softened. For a moment, Clara felt an unspoken understanding pass between them, a fragile connection forged in the quiet of the alley. She stayed for a while, watching from a distance as the cat tended to the puppies. The scene filled her with a strange mixture of sorrow and hope. It reminded her of the stories her mother used to tell her before bed, tales of unlikely friendships and acts of courage in the face of adversity. She hadn't thought about those stories in months, not since the funeral. But now, as she watched the cat, a faint ember of those memories stirred. As the light began to fade, Clara stood reluctantly. "I'll come back," she murmured, though she wasn't sure she was speaking to the cat, the puppies, or herself. She turned and walked away, her steps slower now, her mind racing with thoughts of what she had just seen. That night, Clara lay awake, staring at the cracked ceiling of her bedroom. She couldn't shake the image of the cat and its strange, fragile family. Their vulnerability gnawed at her, but so did their resilience. The cat had no reason to care for those puppies. It wasn't even their species. And yet, it had chosen to protect them, to share its meager resources and fight for their survival. Clara wondered if she could do the same, if she had that kind of strength within her. The next morning, Clara packed a bag with whatever scraps she could find in the kitchen: a half-empty box of crackers, some leftover chicken, a small bottle of water. She left early, her breath visible in the crisp air as she retraced her steps to the alley. The cat was still there, its green eyes gleaming as it spotted her approach. Clara crouched again, placing the food a little closer this time. The cat hesitated but didn't retreat. Clara smiled, her heart lifting ever so slightly. "I'm not going to hurt you," she said softly. "I just want to help." For the first time in what felt like forever, Clara felt a spark of purpose. The cat and its puppies weren't just a chance encounter. They were a lifeline, not just for them, but for her as well. The first few days, Luna kept her distance. Clara didn't mind. She knew trust wasn't something you could demand. It was something you earned, one small act of kindness at a time. Every morning, she packed whatever she could find in her family's kitchen: half-eaten slices of bread, scraps of leftover chicken, or broken crackers, and made her way to the alley. Each offering was left at a respectful distance, with Clara retreating to watch from afar. Luna's sharp green eyes were always on her, every movement scrutinized. The cat waited until Clara was a safe distance away before approaching the food. She would sniff it cautiously, her muscles tense as if prepared for a trap, before snatching it and retreating to her nest. The puppies, too small to eat properly, would paw at the scraps, nibbling with their tiny teeth as Luna nudged the food closer. Clara didn't mind the slow progress. She sat on the cold ground, her knees pulled to her chest, and watched with quiet patience. There was something humbling about being allowed into their world, even as an outsider. The bond between Luna and the puppies fascinated her. The way Luna licked their fur to clean them, curled her body around them to keep them warm, and kept a vigilant eye on her surroundings. It was devotion in its purest form. One day, Clara decided to test the waters. She placed a few pieces of bread closer to the nest, just within Luna's reach, and sat down a few steps away instead of retreating entirely. Luna's ears twitched as she stared at Clara, her body coiled tight with tension. For a long moment, neither moved. Then, slowly, Luna stretched forward and snatched the food, retreating just as quickly to her pups. It wasn't much, but it was a start. "Good girl, Luna," Clara murmured, her voice soft and encouraging. She didn't expect a response, but she felt compelled to speak anyway. Words filled the space between them, her voice weaving a tentative connection. "You're doing such a good job with them. I don't know how you're managing, but you're amazing." Over the next few days, the gap between them continued to close. Luna began to associate Clara's presence with food and safety, her posture less rigid when Clara appeared. The puppies, growing stronger by the day, started to take notice of Clara as well. They would wobble toward her cautiously, their tiny tails wagging in uneven rhythms. Clara's heart swelled each time they moved closer, their trust a gift she cherished. One morning, Clara decided to bring something special: a small bottle of milk she had warmed slightly before leaving home. She poured it into a shallow dish and placed it near the nest. Luna approached cautiously, her nose twitching at the unfamiliar scent. After a moment's hesitation, she began to lap at the milk, her body visibly relaxing. The puppies followed her lead, their tiny tongues darting out to taste the milk. Clara watched, a smile spreading across her face. That day, Luna allowed Clara to sit closer than ever before. Clara felt her chest tighten with emotion as she watched Luna lick the smallest puppy clean, her movements careful and deliberate. The puppies tumbled over one another, their small barks filling the alley with a liveliness that had been absent before. Clara reached out slowly, her hand resting on the edge of the blanket Luna had claimed for her nest. Luna's gaze flicked to her hand, but didn't retreat. "I think you're starting to trust me," Clara said softly. Her voice carried no expectation, only a quiet hope. She stayed there for hours, watching as the puppies played, and Luna rested her head on her paws. For the first time, Clara felt a sense of peace. The sadness that had weighed her down since her mother's passing seemed lighter, replaced by a growing sense of purpose. By the end of the week, Clara was no longer an outsider. Luna would meet her at the edge of the alley, her sharp eyes softening as Clara knelt and offered her daily gifts. The puppies greeted Clara with wagging tails and curious noses, their small bodies pressing against her hand as she reached out to pet them gently. Luna watched but didn't stop them, a silent acknowledgement that Clara had earned her place in their fragile world. As Clara sat among them, her hands gently stroking the puppy's soft fur, she realized something she hadn't felt in months: hope. This unlikely family, cat and puppies, girl and strays, had given her a reason to look forward to each day. For the first time in a long time, Clara felt like she belonged. As the days passed, Clara's daily visits to the alley became a familiar routine. She had begun bringing more substantial offerings for Luna and the puppies: bits of canned tuna, soft bread soaked in milk, and even a few old towels from home to replace the tattered blanket that barely shielded them from the cold. The tiny family was thriving, and Clara felt a growing sense of pride in their progress. But not everyone shared her compassion. One afternoon, as Clara sat cross-legged near the nest, gently stroking the smallest puppy's soft fur, she heard the sharp sound of approaching footsteps. She looked up to see a man in a grease-stained uniform glaring at her. He carried a broom and gestured toward Luna and the puppies with an impatient wave. "You shouldn't be feeding them," he barked. "It'll just make them stick around. Strays bring disease." Clara felt her cheeks flush. "They're just trying to survive," she said, her voice trembling slightly but firm. "It's not their fault someone abandoned them." The man snorted and muttered something under his breath before walking off, shaking his head. Clara's chest tightened as she watched him leave. She glanced back at Luna, who had retreated protectively to her nest, her green eyes flashing with caution. Clara crouched beside her, murmuring softly to calm her. "It's okay, Luna. He's gone." Despite encounters like these, Clara wasn't entirely alone in her efforts. Over time, word about the stray cat and her adopted puppies began to spread among the locals. Some dismissed it as an oddity, but others found themselves moved by the story. Mrs. Patel, the elderly woman who owned the corner grocery, started setting aside scraps for Clara to take to the animals. "It's not much," she said one day, handing Clara a bag of leftover vegetables and stale bread, "but every little bit helps." Clara thanked her with a grateful smile. "You have no idea how much this means to them." Even Mr. Thompson, the gruff owner of the hardware store who rarely spoke to anyone, had a quiet change of heart. One day, Clara found an old plastic tarp folded neatly outside the alley. She didn't need to ask who had left it. The subtle kindness spoke volumes. She used it to create a makeshift roof over the puppy's nest, protecting them from the worst of the wind and rain. But for every small act of kindness, there were moments that tested Clara's resolve. A group of teenagers discovered the alley one afternoon, their laughter echoing off the brick walls. Clara watched from a distance, her stomach knotting as they approached the nest. Luna hissed, her body coiled as she stood guard over the puppies. The boys threw a few rocks, not to harm but to taunt. Clara rushed forward, her voice shaking with anger. "Stop it! Leave them alone!" The boys laughed, one of them tossing a final stone before they scattered. Clara's hands trembled as she knelt beside Luna, whispering words of comfort. "You're safe now. I won't let anyone hurt you." That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her mind replaying the events of the day. She realized with growing certainty that Luna and the puppies couldn't stay in the alley forever. Their safety was fragile, constantly at the mercy of those who chose to harm or help. Clara knew she needed a plan, but the weight of the task ahead felt overwhelming. The next morning, as Clara stood in the grocery store waiting for Mrs. Patel to bag her items, she overheard a conversation at the counter. A young woman, dressed in scrubs, was talking about a local animal rescue organization she volunteered for. Clara's heart leaped. As soon as the woman left, Clara followed her out onto the sidewalk. "Excuse me," Clara said, her voice timid but determined. I couldn't help but overhear you. You mentioned an animal rescue? The woman, surprised, smiled warmly. Yes, I work with them part-time. Why? Clara hesitated for only a moment before launching into the story of Luna and the puppies. The woman listened intently, her expression shifting from curiosity to concern. That's incredible, she said when Clara finished. I'd love to help. Here's the number for our intake coordinator. They might be able to assist. Clara clutched the piece of paper tightly, her hope reignited. As she walked back to the alley that day, she felt a renewed sense of determination. Luna and the puppies deserved more than a life of uncertainty and danger. They deserved safety, warmth, and a chance to thrive. As she approached the nest, Clara crouched down beside Luna, who nuzzled one of the puppies protectively. We're going to figure this out, Clara whispered. I promise. Luna blinked up at her, her green eyes unyielding, as if she understood. Clara's footsteps echoed through the alley as she approached, the cool air settling against her skin. She had grown accustomed to the familiar sights and sounds of the place, the soft whimpers of the puppies and the gentle purring of Luna as they settled in for the evening. But tonight, something was different. The usual warmth of the space seemed absent. The alley felt colder, more ominous. The light from the street lamps flickered overhead, casting long, jagged shadows across the ground. Clara's eyes darted to the corner where Luna and the puppies had made their home. But the space was empty. No sight of the cat, no small, wriggling bodies huddled together. Only the remnants of the makeshift nest lay abandoned in the center of the alley, a few shredded pieces of fabric scattered like forgotten memories. Clara's breath caught in her throat. Panic began to rise in her chest. She walked cautiously forward, scanning the alley for any sign of movement. Her heart was thumping in her ears as she called out softly, Luna? Pups? There was no answer. Suddenly, a rustling noise broke the silence. Clara spun around to see a tall figure emerging from the shadows. A man, dressed in a dark green uniform, carrying a large plastic bag. He glanced at her for a moment, his face hard and unreadable, before continuing with his work. The man was part of the city sanitation team. She had seen him around before. But what was he doing here in the alley this time of night? Clara's mind raced. She took a step forward, her voice tight with urgency. Hey, what are you doing here? The man paused, looking at her with a mix of confusion and mild annoyance. Cleaning up, he said flatly, as though it were the most obvious thing in the world. This area is a mess. We've been ordered to clear it out. Clara's stomach dropped. Clear it out? But there are animals here, a cat and some puppies. You can't just. The man cut her off, his expression turning colder. I don't make the rules. I'm just here to do my job. Clara's chest tightened with panic. She turned quickly and ran toward the corner where she had last seen Luna and the puppies. Her eyes scanned the area desperately, her heart racing. She didn't care about the trash or the filth. She only cared about the animals. A sharp, sudden noise stopped her in her tracks. The unmistakable sound of an engine revving. Clara spun around to see a large sanitation truck pulling up to the alley, its headlights blinding against the darkening sky. The truck ground to a halt, and two more workers stepped out, their faces hidden beneath the hoods of their jackets. Her breath hitched. This wasn't just a casual cleanup. This was an eviction. No! Clara shouted, her voice breaking as she ran toward the workers. Please, you can't take them. There's a cat and puppies here. They need shelter. They can't just be moved or... The first man, the one she had spoken to earlier, raised his hand dismissively. Lady, we don't have time for this. We've got orders to clear the alley. You want to save the animals? You need to get them out of here. Clara's mind raced. She couldn't let them take the animals. Not like this. Not after all they had been through. Her thoughts swirled as she looked around, desperate for a solution. But the truck was already parked too close to the nest, the workers too busy with their tools to notice her as she frantically scanned the alley for Luna. A loud screech of metal against pavement cut through the air, and Clara's heart sank. One of the workers had started pushing the pile of trash bags toward the back of the alley, knocking into the corner where the puppies had slept only hours earlier. Luna's protective instinct must have kicked in. because from the shadows, Clara saw the flash of her green eyes. The cat appeared, hissing loudly and darting toward the workers, her small frame a stark contrast to the looming men. "Luna!" Clara shouted, her voice full of desperation. But Luna didn't seem to hear her. She was too focused on protecting the puppies. With a guttural growl, she swiped at the workers' legs, her claws flashing. The man yelped and jumped back in surprise, but Luna was relentless. The chaos of the moment felt unreal, like a bad dream, but Clara couldn't afford to wait. She rushed forward, the adrenaline pumping through her veins. "Stop! You don't understand. These animals are vulnerable. You can't just throw them out like garbage." The workers paused, glancing at one another, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. The man who had been closest to Luna bent down and aimed a kick at her, his boots connecting with the cat's side. Clara screamed in horror, her heart breaking as Luna was sent sprawling to the ground. "Stop it!" Clara cried again, feeling a surge of fury. Without thinking, she lunged forward, pushing between the workers to shield Luna from further harm. The workers seemed momentarily stunned, unsure of how to react to the young woman suddenly standing between them and the cat. "Get away from her," Clara demanded, her voice shaking but resolute. "They're just trying to survive. Please, you can't." Before she could finish, the roar of an approaching siren pierced the air. Clara turned to see another vehicle, a police car, pulling up to the alley entrance, its flashing lights adding a sense of urgency to the already tense scene. Clara's eyes widened. She knew the authorities could escalate things even further. If they didn't act quickly, Luna and the puppies would be carted off, and she'd never be able to find them again. Her breath caught in her throat. She needed help, but who could she turn to now? The shrill sound of the siren faded as the police car came to a halt at the mouth of the alley. Clara stood frozen, her eyes flicking back and forth between the workers and Luna, who was still huddling protectively near the puppies. A cold sweat trickled down her back as she realized that everything she had worked for, everything she had built, could be torn apart in an instant. "Is everything all right here?" the officer called out, his voice a little too calm for Clara's liking. He glanced at the sanitation workers, then at Clara, standing between them and the animals. "No, everything is not all right," Clara blurted, her voice shaking with both fear and frustration. "These animals need help. They've been abandoned and need a safe place. You can't just take them away." The officer hesitated, his gaze flickering briefly to the workers. "Lady, this is a sanitation issue. We're just clearing the area. We can't have animals living in the trash." Clara felt her chest tighten. "They're not trash. They're living beings. I've been feeding them, looking after them. They need protection, not to be moved around like they don't matter." The officer shifted uncomfortably. He wasn't prepared for this. It was clear from the way his brow furrowed that he didn't know how to handle the situation. But Clara wasn't going to back down. Her heart was in overdrive as she thought about Luna and the puppies, about how far they had come. They had fought to survive, and now so would she. In that moment of tension, the officer looked at the sanitation workers, then back at Clara, as though searching for something, some explanation, some reason to intervene. Then, something unexpected happened. One of the sanitation workers, the one who had first spoken to Clara, stepped forward. "Wait," he said, his voice more measured than before. He glanced nervously at the others before continuing. "I think we might have gone too far. She's right. These animals, they don't deserve to be pushed out like this." Clara blinked, unsure whether she had heard him correctly. "What do you mean?" The worker hesitated, glancing at his colleagues, before lowering his voice. "Look, I'm not saying we can let them stay here, but maybe we can find another solution. There's an animal shelter nearby. It's a no-kill place. I've heard they've taken strays." Clara's heart skipped a beat. A shelter? She felt a surge of hope, but her caution kept her grounded. "Are you sure they'll take them?" The worker nodded. "I can give you the number. They might be able to come by and take them in." I can't speak for them, but it's better than just throwing them out here." The officer seemed to finally understand, his posture relaxing just a little. "All right, we'll back off for now," he said, his tone more sympathetic now. "But you'd better make sure they're taken care of." His gaze softened as he looked at the puppies, their tiny bodies shivering in the cold air. I'll be leaving now, but I hope you've got this sorted out." As the officer and the sanitation workers filed out, leaving Clara alone with the animals, she let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She turned to Luna, who was still crouched protectively over her puppies. "We're going to get you to safety," Clara whispered, her voice full of both relief and determination. She quickly pulled out her phone, dialing the number the worker had given her. It rang twice before a soft voice answered. "Hope Animal Rescue. How can I help you?" Clara's words rushed out, stumbling over each other as she explained the situation. The abandoned puppies, the stray cat, the threat they faced. There was a pause on the other end, and for a moment, Clara's hope flickered. But then the voice came back, calm and assuring. "We'll send a team to pick them up. Don't worry, they'll be safe with us. Just hang tight, okay?" Clara's chest tightened with gratitude. "Thank you. Thank you so much." She hung up, her mind still racing. She knelt down next to Luna, her hands trembling as she gently petted the cat's fur. "Help is on the way," she said, her voice low and reassuring. "You're going to be all right. You and your puppies are going to be okay." Luna blinked at her, her green eyes filled with an expression Clara couldn't quite read, but she could have sworn there was a flicker of trust in them. The small puppies, now stronger, crawled closer to Clara, their tiny bodies nuzzling against her hand. It felt like a miracle to her, like the first flicker of light at the end of a long tunnel. Within an hour, the animal rescue team arrived, a small, compassionate crew in a van, their faces kind and understanding. They had everything prepared to transport Luna and the puppies to the shelter, where they would be treated and cared for properly. Clara watched, a mix of emotions swelling in her chest, as the team gently loaded the animals into their transport cages. Luna, surprisingly calm, let them do their work without protest, while the puppies, now fully awake and alert, seemed to sense the change. "Thank you so much," Clara said, her voice cracking as she watched them load the last puppy into the van. "You have no idea how much this means to me." And to them, the team leader smiled softly. "It's our job. We're just glad we could help. They'll be well taken care of." As the van drove off into the night, Clara stood alone in the alley, the weight of everything that had happened pressing down on her. She had saved them. She had truly saved them. It wasn't just a story about a stray cat and her puppies anymore. It was a story of kindness, of a community coming together, of finding light in the darkest places. Clara smiled through the tears that threatened to fall. She didn't know what the future held for Luna and the puppies, but one thing was certain. They had a chance now, and that was all that mattered. Months passed, and the seasons began to shift once more, the harsh winter yielding to the gentle warmth of spring. The transformation that had taken place in the shelter was nothing short of miraculous. Luna, who had once been a wary, skeletal creature huddling in fear, had blossomed into a confident, loving cat, her fur sleek and shiny. Her green eyes, once full of caution, now gleamed with trust and contentment. The puppies, once tiny and fragile, had grown into healthy, energetic dogs, their eyes full of curiosity and their tails always wagging with excitement. Clara visited the shelter every weekend, her bond with Luna and the puppies growing stronger with each passing day. There was something about the quiet moments they shared, the way Luna would purr softly as Clara stroked her fur, or the way the puppies would crawl into her lap, nipping playfully at her fingers. It was more than just a visit. It felt like home. One Saturday afternoon, as Clara sat in the small waiting area of the shelter, a sudden thought struck her. She had been visiting for months now, always careful not to get too attached, always telling herself that it wasn't practical to bring them home. But as she watched Luna curl up with her puppies, all of them content in each other's presence, Clara felt a deep sense of longing. She had fought so hard to give them a chance at life, to give them the care and love they deserved. Why shouldn't they have a chance to be part of her life, too? Clara stood up abruptly, her heart racing as the decision took root. She walked to the front desk, where she found Julie, the shelter manager, flipping through a clipboard of adoption forms. Clara's voice was soft but steady as she approached. "Julie, is there any chance that Luna and the puppies could be adopted together? I know it's unusual, but I've been thinking about it, and I'd like to bring them home." Julie looked up, her expression warm but cautious. "Clara, you've been such an amazing advocate for these animals. You've given them a second chance, and you've earned their trust. But adopting them, it's a big commitment. Are you sure you're ready for that kind of responsibility?" Clara nodded, her heart brimming with certainty. "I know it's a lot, but I've thought it through. I can give them a loving home. I've seen how much they've healed already, and I want to be the one to continue that. I can't imagine my life without them now." Julie smiled, clearly moved by Clara's words. "I can see how much you care for them. You've done so much already. I'll get the paperwork ready for you. But just know, this will be a big change for all of you." Clara's heart soared as Julie handed her the adoption forms. She signed her name with a sense of pride and finality, knowing that this was the beginning of something beautiful. The family that had once been abandoned and broken was now whole. Luna and her puppies would be safe, loved, and cherished. The day Clara brought Luna and the puppies home was a quiet one, filled with a sense of wonder. She had spent hours preparing her apartment, transforming it into a safe and comfortable space for them. Soft beds, toys scattered across the floor, and a warm corner by the window where the sun would stream in during the afternoon. All of it was ready. When the door to the shelter van opened, and Luna stepped out first, her tail held high, Clara's heart swelled with emotion. The puppies followed, tumbling out one by one, their small bodies wobbly with excitement. Luna looked up at Clara, her eyes filled with trust, as though she knew this was home now too. As they entered Clara's apartment for the first time, the puppies raced around in circles, exploring every corner with exuberance. Luna, ever the protective mother, stood by Clara's side, watching the chaos unfold with a calm assurance. Clara knelt down, her hands trembling as she reached out to pet her. "Welcome home," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. In the months that followed, Clara's life changed in ways she hadn't expected. Luna and the puppies, now named Toby, Bella, and Max, filled her apartment with joy and energy. They became her family, each of them contributing their own unique love and spirit to her life. Clara found herself waking up to the sound of tiny paws padding across the floor, to the soft, comforting weight of Luna curled up next to her at night. She marveled at how much they had healed, how much she had healed. Their journey together had begun with uncertainty, fear, and loss, but now it was a journey of love, connection, and growth. Luna, once a stray cat abandoned in a dumpster, now had a home filled with warmth. The puppies, who had been so vulnerable in the face of the world's cruelty, had blossomed into strong, healthy dogs who thrived in the safety of Clara's care. Clara often thought back to that day when she had found them, alone in the alley, their tiny bodies trembling in the cold. She had been a stranger to them then, and yet, somehow, she had become the person who gave them a second chance. And in doing so, they had given her something just as precious in return, a chance to live a life filled with unconditional love. One evening, as Clara sat on the couch with Luna nestled in her lap and the puppies sprawled out at her feet, she felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. She realized that this story was not just about a cat and her puppies finding safety. It was about a woman learning to open her heart, to trust again, and to embrace the beauty of family in all its forms. Luna, Toby, Bella, and Max had become her legacy. They had come into her life when she least expected it, transforming her world with their love. And in doing so, they had left a permanent mark on her heart. Clara no longer wondered whether she had made the right decision. She knew she had. In rescuing them, she had saved herself as well. And as the soft glow of the evening sun filtered through the window, Clara smiled, surrounded by the sound of contented purring and playful barks. This was home. This was where they all belonged. I know you guys have already subscribed till now, but if you have not, do like, share, and subscribe.